What if I told you that the hardest part of learning a new language has like absolutely nothing to do with memorizing grammar rules or verb conjugations?
Yeah, it really doesn't.
Right. I mean, the truly brutal part is the psychological trauma. You're an intelligent, articulate adult, and then suddenly you sound like a toddler.
You're completely stripped of your ability to express complex thoughts.
Exactly. You're reduced to pointing at things and just feeling utterly helpless. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we've got a very specific piece of source material that tackles this exact vulnerability head on.
It really does. It's a transcript from a beginner's language lesson, and it's just simply titled Learn English Day 10.
Yeah, and the stated mission of this 15-minute audio track is just to introduce 10 new vocabulary words to absolute beginners.
Right, and on its surface, it appears to be a standard, perhaps even mundane listen and repeat exercise.
Like you see a list of 10 words, and you just assume the goal is brute force memorization.
Exactly. But when you look under the hood of how this specific lesson is structured, it stops being a simple vocabulary list. It actually reveals itself as a highly sophisticated masterclass in behavioral psychology, neurobiology, and, well, pedagogical design.
It's engineering a learner's confidence from the ground up.
Completely.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the lesson does not start with nouns. It doesn't teach you how to ask where the bathroom is or, how to order a coffee.
No, it skips all of that.
Right. The first half of the lesson focuses entirely on 5 abstract concepts: curious, patient, polite, nervous, proud. And I have to push back a little on the premise here
How so?
because conceptually these seem far too advanced for day 10. If someone is an absolute beginner, handing them words like curious or patient feels like, well, it's like giving a mountain climber their safety carabiners and teaching them deep breathing techniques before they've even seen the rock face they're supposed to climb.
What's fascinating here is that your mountain climbing analogy is the exact psychological mechanism at play. Yeah, by choosing to teach nervous, patient, and proud at such an early stage, the curriculum developers are handing the learner the emotional safety gear required for the journey.
Oh.
They're providing the exact vocabulary you need to label the emotional friction of the learning process itself. I mean, in cognitive psychology, there's a concept known as affect labeling.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, when an adult is struggling to communicate, the brain registers that inability as a threat. The amygdala, which is the brain's fear center, lights up, cortisol is released.
It's a stress hormone.
Right. And when you're stressed, a neurological barrier called the affective filter goes up. It literally blocks the brain from processing new language input.
So wait, the stress of feeling stupid actually prevents you from getting smarter. Like the brain just goes into lockdown.
Precisely. But neuroimaging studies show that when you simply assign a word to a negative emotion, when you literally name the frustration activity in the amygdala decreases. Yeah, so by teaching the word patient and pairing it with the example sentence, you need to be patient when learning English, the lesson is anticipating the learner's cortisol spike.
It's giving them the linguistic tool to label their frustration.
Exactly. Which scientifically dampens the stress response and lowers that affective filter.
Man, that reframes the entire sequence of those first 5 words. If we look at them in order: curious, patient, polite, nervous, proud, it isn't a random assortment of adjectives.
That at all.
It's a chronological map of a student's internal life cycle. I mean, you walk into a new challenge feeling curious, you inevitably hit a wall and have to remain patient.
Right.
You interact with instructors or peers, so you need to be polite. You face an impending assessment and feel nervous. And then finally, you see your progress and feel proud.
They are validating the learner's internal state before asking them to perform.
Which is such a profound pedagogical strategy.
Yeah, it really is. Because before a student can absorb external information, their internal environment must be stabilized. The curriculum is essentially functioning as a cognitive behavioral therapist.
Disguised as an English teacher.
Exactly. It tells the listener, the fact that you feel nervous or frustrated isn't a sign of failure. It's an expected part of the curriculum.
But surviving that emotional gauntlet is only half the battle, right? Because once that internal baseline is established, the lesson stops looking inward.
Yeah, it pivots.
It transitions rapidly to words dealing with utility, reality, and, long-term vision. The next 5 words introduced are useful, honest, successful, common, future.
So we move from emotional regulation to overarching motivation.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. If you analyze the example sentences provided for this second batch of words, they are incredibly targeted.
Oh, they definitely are.
Like for the word future, the instructor uses the sentence, I want to improve my English for my future. And when introducing successful, the prompt is, practice can help you become successful.
They are explicitly weaponizing the listener's own ambitions.
Yes.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the lesson is constructing what behavioral economists call an aspirational framework.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, learning a language requires a massive amount of delayed gratification. Around day 10 of any new endeavor, that initial excitement fades, and the reality of the grueling work sets in.
Right, the honeymoon phase is over. Motivation plummets.
Exactly. So by introducing the word successful in this specific context, it ceases to be just a string of syllables to memorize. It becomes a psychological anchor.
It constantly reminds the person sitting alone in their room, repeating vocabulary, why they're putting themselves through the discomfort.
Yeah, they aren't just memorizing the definition of future, they are actively building one.
That's powerful. And then the lesson grounds those lofty goals with words like useful and common, tying the big dreams back to everyday reality. The implication is that these high-level aspirations are built using practical everyday tools.
And that combination of high-level aspiration and grounded utility triggers the brain's dopamine pathways.
Interesting.
We often think of dopamine as just a reward chemical, but it's primarily a motivation chemical. It spikes when we can clearly visualize a path to a desired goal.
So by defining these specific words and tying them to the listener's daily practice, the lesson is artificially generating dopamine to push the learner through the inevitable fatigue of day 10.
That's exactly what it's doing.
Okay, so that explains the why behind the word selection. We have this highly curated, emotionally resonant, and aspirational list of 10 words. But understanding a concept and actually encoding it into your neural pathway so you can retrieve it during a conversation, those are two entirely different biological processes.
And totally different.
And the source material outlines a very rigid methodology for this, right? It's a 4-step learning loop. Listen, repeat, use, practice. And the core rule they emphasize is, don't just learn the word, use the word.
Right. That 4-step loop is the engine of the entire transcript. Moving from passive reception to active generation is what physically alters the synaptic connections in the brain.
The progression they use to execute this loop, it kind of reminds me of how someone learns to play a musical instrument.
How so?
Well, you don't just pick up a guitar and play a concerto, right? First, you have to learn to play individual notes. And the lesson mimics this by starting with slow, syllable-by-syllable pronunciation practice.
Ah, right.
The hosts explicitly break the words down like curious, patient, successful. The learner is just plucking single strings, training their mouth to make unfamiliar shapes.
Yeah, and biologically, you are engaging Broca's area, which is the region of the brain responsible for speech production. You're building the foundational motor skills of language, completely separate from the cognitive task of understanding meaning.
Right. And then, once you can play the single notes, you move on to basic chord progressions. In the transcript, this takes the form of a fill-in-the-blank challenge.
Okay.
The instructor says, I am blank about this new English lesson, and pauses. The listener is forced to supply the word curious. Or, please be blank, I need a little more time. And the listener has to retrieve the word patient.
That is constrained recall?
Constrained recall.
Yeah. By forcing the brain to reach into its newly formed database and select the correct file based on contextual clues, you're strengthening the neural pathway to that specific piece of information. The struggle to remember the word is actually what signals the brain that the word is important enough to keep.
But playing chords isn't making music. You eventually have to play the full song.
Exactly.
And the lesson achieves this by culminating in a mini conversation. It's a scripted, continuous dialogue between the two hosts. So in the story, Emma has an English-speaking test today. She explicitly states she is nervous.
Right, tying back to the emotion.
Her co-host advises her to be patient and speak slowly. Emma calls that advice useful. She admits she's curious about how well she will perform. She's reminded to be proud of her progress thus far. Emma says she hopes she will be successful and is finally told to keep practicing for her future.
This raises an important question, though. Why go through the trouble of scripting a fictional conversation? Like, how does shifting from isolated sentences to active scenario building change memory retention?
It has to be a mnemonic device, right?
Yeah.
By weaving 7 of the 10 vocabulary words into a single narrative, especially a high-stakes scenario like an impending test, the listener can project their own anxiety onto Emma.
Oh, definitely.
The listener is also taking an English test, in a way. Emma's story basically becomes a vehicle for the vocabulary.
That is a highly astute observation. What you're describing is the shift from semantic memory to episodic memory.
Walk me through the difference there.
Well, semantic memory is our storage for facts, concepts, and definitions. And it is notoriously leaky. We forget lists almost instantly.
Right, I cram for a test and forget it the next day.
Exactly. Episodic memory, however, is our storage for events, narratives, and emotions. Our brains evolved over millions of years to remember stories and social dynamics, not flashcards.
That makes a lot of sense.
So by mapping the vocabulary onto Emma's emotional arc, the lesson hacks the listener's brain. It forces the vocabulary into the much stronger episodic memory network. The words are no longer abstract. They're the survival tools Emma used to navigate a stressful situation.
The emotional context acts as the glue. Nervous isn't just a synonym for worried anymore. It's the pit in your stomach before the examiner calls your name.
Exactly.
And the scaffolding of this entire process is just so elegant. From syllables to fill-in-the-blanks to a full narrative, the lesson incrementally demands more cognitive load. It constantly pushes the learner toward independent fluency, but the increments are so small that the learner never feels like they are falling.
It creates a state of flow, where the challenge perfectly matches the current skill level.
Which brings us to the final segment of the source material. The lesson doesn't just end when the mini-conversation is over. It wraps up with a very specific, actionable mandate called the Day 10 Challenge.
Right.
The listener is instructed to take a physical piece of paper, write down all 10 words, choose 3 of them, create their own unique sentences, read them aloud, and then, crucially, they are told they must read that piece of paper again tomorrow.
And that final instruction to revisit the paper tomorrow is perhaps the most scientifically rigorous element in the entire 15 minutes.
So what does this all mean? Why this specific combination of physical writing and delayed review?
It directly combats a phenomenon known as the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve.
The what?
The Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered that our brains immediately begin purging new information to conserve metabolic energy. Within the first 24 hours of learning something new, retention drops exponentially.
So if you just listen to a podcast or an audio lesson, you'll forget like roughly 70% of it by the next morning.
Yeah, exactly. However, the lesson forces 2 interventions here. First, physical writing. Forming letters on paper engages haptic feedback and the generation effect. This activates entirely different neural networks than simply speaking or listening. It creates a richer memory trace.
You're leaving a deeper footprint in the brain.
Exactly that. And second, by mandating that the learner looks at that specific piece of paper the next day, the lesson artificially disrupts the forgetting curve. This is the absolute foundation of spaced repetition.
Because you're recalling the information just as the brain is about to discard it.
Right. You send a biological signal that this data is essential for survival. The brain responds by moving the information from short-term holding into long-term storage.
Wow, so it's engineering the habit of return.
Yeah.
But what makes this challenge so sustainable is the messaging that surrounds it.
The tone is so important.
Right. As the hosts deliver these instructions, they just flood the listener with encouragement. They explicitly state, the goal is progress, not perfection. They remind the learner that every new word is simply another way to express themselves, and that maybe your English is not perfect yet, and that is completely okay.
They're strategically shifting the learner's focus away from a micro goal and toward a meta goal.
Elaborate on that distinction. I think that's key.
Well, a micro goal in this context would be flawlessly memorizing all 10 definitions and perfectly conjugating every verb. If a beginner measures their success against a micro goal on day 10, they will inevitably feel like a failure.
Right.
And failure triggers that affective filter we discussed earlier, creating anxiety and blocking future learning. But a meta goal is about the system, the identity, and the habit.
Like just showing up.
Exactly. The lesson frames the victory simply as the act of showing up. You have completed 10 days of English practice. They are celebrating the behavior of learning, ensuring the student feels a sense of accomplishment regardless of their grammatical accuracy.
The instruction is literally, don't worry about mistakes, just speak. It serves as a technical directive to get the mouth moving, but more importantly, it's a psychological intervention. It removes the paralyzing fear of being wrong.
It builds the psychological resilience required to remain a beginner. When you prioritize progress over perfection, you create an environment where the brain feels safe enough to take the risks necessary for language acquisition.
Looking at all of this laid out, it really changes how you view educational content. To summarize for you listening, What presents itself as a basic beginner's list of 10 English words is actually a meticulously crafted behavioral blueprint.
It's incredible.
This transcript doesn't just throw definitions at a student. It maps the emotional trauma of learning, providing words like curious and nervous to regulate the nervous system. It connects those raw feelings to grand aspirations using words like future and successful.
And it anchors all of that psychology in ruthless, evidence-based methodology. It uses the listen, repeat, use, practice loop to transition from motor skill development to episodic memory encoding, finally employing spaced repetition to ensure the knowledge survives the forgetting curve.
It's a framework not just for language, but for mastering any intimidating new skill. Which leaves us with a rather profound philosophical question to chew on. Something inherent in the material but never explicitly addressed.
Ooh, okay. What is it?
The lesson provides straightforward utilitarian definitions for deeply complex human virtues, right? Patient is defined as able to wait calmly. Honest is simply telling the truth.
Right, they are reductive definitions, necessarily so for a beginner, but yeah.
But it makes you wonder about the concept of linguistic relativity, the idea that the language we speak influences how we perceive reality.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Right. When you learn a massive abstract concept in a completely new language, are you simply mapping that new vocabulary word back to your native tongue's understanding of it? Or does the struggle of learning a new language with all its unique cultural contexts and idioms actually begin to alter your fundamental perception of what it means to be polite or what it means to be successful?
Does acquiring the new word reshape the virtue itself in your mind?
Exactly. If we go back to our mountain climber, once you learn the name of the safety gear in an entirely different language, does it fundamentally change the way you look at the mountain?
That is a wild thought.
It's something to keep in mind the next time you find yourself as an absolute beginner, standing at the bottom of the rock face trying to find your footing.